The modern human steps into life with a vague yet profound feeling. We are not truly masters of ourselves, even when we say, I decide, I choose, in the darkness of the unconscious. A whisper still echoes. In truth, you are being led. Jung often emphasized that consciousness, the waking self, is but a small flickering candle in the vast night. And in that immense darkness, there are invisible currents, primordial forces, silently carrying us along. In this beginning stage, the soul is like a dry leaf drifting on a river. The leaf believes it moves by will, but in reality, every twist, every turn is determined by the water. Jung called this the fundamental doubt, the doubt about the true power of consciousness. It is not merely philosophy, but an existential experience, a feeling of being shaken as if standing in a strange wind without knowing where it comes from. The important point here is not explanation, but acknowledgement of the feeling. The psychological seeker must dare to accept helplessness, dare to face the feeling of, I do not control myself. Jung saw this as the first gateway into the analytic journey. For if one does not begin with this truth, all subsequent searching is only self-deception. And so, my words resound like a heavy bell. Have the courage to realize that you are only a companion to the darkness within yourself. You think you are leading, but in truth, you are being led. Now, when one has only reached the stage of helplessness and doubt, the next step is the direct encounter with the symbols rising from the unconscious. I do not call the unconscious an obscure void, but a living ocean that continually surges with waves of images, memories, obsessions, and dreams. What is pushed out of the control of consciousness does not disappear. It only hides in the dark, waiting for the chance to embody itself. The more we deny, the more we repress, the more they seek other ways to appear, sometimes violently, sometimes so subtly that we believe it is our own choice. The one who embarks on the inner journey begins to realize that every dream, every obsession, every nameless anxiety is a cipher sent by the unconscious. A snake appearing in a dream is not just a snake. It may be primal power, repressed, or it may be instinctual fear. A strange face returning again and again in the imagination is not mere coincidence, but perhaps the very shadow self, demanding recognition. This is a deeply unsettling moment, for one realizes one is no longer a unified self, but a polyphonic field where many voices and images overlap, sometimes opposing each other, all resounding together. I believe that if we keep ignoring these symbols, will become symptoms. Unexplained anxiety, spiritual exhaustion, sudden impulses that destroy relationships. But if we know how to listen, dare to enter dialogue with the symbols, then the unconscious becomes an ally, offering us an ancient wisdom older than modern reason. Within chaos lies a hidden order that only inner patience can gradually reveal. At this stage, the seeker carries two opposing emotions. On one side, fear. For the unconscious conjures strange images, like a doorway opening to an unknown land. On the other side, attraction. For those symbols contain intense vitality and open the possibility of transformation. This is the moment we realize we are not only living in a material world, but also in a symbolic universe, where every image is a doorway into uncharted depths. I remind that who looks outside dreams who looks inside awakens. And it is here that man begins to look within, to learn to read the vague language of the unconscious. Like a voyager, hearing the call of the ocean for the first time, from here, the journey is no longer mere doubt, but a true confrontation with the unknown. When the symbols of the unconscious begin to rise, one cannot avoid collision with a silent yet powerful force. The shadow. I believe the shadow is not merely the negative traits we wish to reject, but all capacities, desire, memories, parts abandoned within us because they did not fit the ideal self-image that consciousness created. In other words, the shadow is the exiled companion, still walking silently beside us, waiting to be acknowledged. In this journey, the seeker begins to feel a fierce resistance from within. Émotion, once Denis Angers, on désir, envy, ambition, or even weakness once buried now rise like voices impossible to ignore. In dreams, the shadow may appear as an enemy, a threatening figure, or a nameless beast in pursuit. In real life, the shadow manifests through conflicts in relationships, through unconscious acts that ruin what reason tries to build. This is when one realizes the greatest enemy is not outside, but within one's own soul. But Jung warned, the shadow is not to be annihilated. For when we try to remove it completely, we also remove a part of primal strength, creativity, and vital survival instinct. The true task is not denial, but negotiation and integration. We must dare to face it, recognize it as part of ourselves, and learn to reconcile when one dares to say, yes, within me there is selfishness, anger, and weakness. Then in that very moment, the shadow begins to lose its destructive power and transforms into usable energy. This is a great challenge, for no one wishes to admit they are not pure, but only truth opens the way to transformation. The one who steps here experiences violent tension, both fearing the shadow and feeling its irresistible pull. And it is precisely this tension that reveals the essence of the journey. The path to wholeness is not the path of elimination, but the path of embracing contradiction to become a larger being containing both light and shadow. Yet it still cannot end. For facing the shadow is only a doorway. Beyond it lies another land, where shadow and light must find union, where the soul takes a greater leap, the inner rebirth. Next comes the stage of transformation, individuation. When man ceases to be a victim of the unconscious and begins to become the creator of a new consciousness, after confronting the shadow and realizing that within the depths of oneself lie both light and dark recesses, the journey moves to a new threshold, integration. This is the stage I call individuation, the process by which man gradually becomes himself, no longer living only through social roles or ego illusions, but as a unified being, both human and divine, finite and eternal. Integration is not a simple reconciliation, as if light merely needs to swallow shadow. On the contrary, it is like a mysterious marriage. Two opposing principles, ens ennemis, now must learn to coexist and create a new form of being. In spiritual life, this manifests through dreams and strong intuitions of rebirth. One feels as though there is a central image within the soul. I call it the self, rising above the small ego, which is only a part of the whole. Integration begins when one allows the rejected parts to speak, no longer seeing them as strangers, but listening as if to one's own flesh and blood. In the moment we can say, I am both noble and base, both bright and dark, both strong and weak, and all of that is me. And then transformation has truly begun. This is the greatest courage, for it breaks the illusion that we can keep a wholly pure, a wholly righteous identity. Instead, we become a truly living human being, fully containing contradictions and creating from them, in this process, the symbols of the unconscious become increasingly distinct. The seeker may encounter images of anima, animus, the archetype of the feminine in man, the masculine in woman, like an invitation to spiritual gender balance. They may face the image of the guide or the wise old man, like a voice from the deep unconscious, advising, supporting, illuminating the way. Every symbol, every spiritual experience here is a reminder the self is not just the personal ego, but a greater center where all fragments find their place. Integration does not mean calm. It is a shaking, as if the inner world must undergo its own cosmic restructuring. Old value dissolve, definitions of success or failure, right or wrong, good or evil are gradually questioned. Instead, the one who walks this path begins to live by a deeper principle, the principle of wholeness. They no longer seek to please the outer world, but live in fidelity to the call of the soul. Yet, this is still not the end. For after shadow and light unite, after anima and animus find balance, man faces an even deeper challenge. The offering to the self, the complete rebirth, in which the ego no longer holds supreme power, but accepts becoming an instrument, a medium for a greater being to manifest. This is the invitation to the sacred rebirth. A leap beyond the limits of the small ego to live in the rhythm of the cosmos. When shadow and light have met, when the opposites in the soul have found their initial place, man still has not completed the journey, for there is still a deeper shift, which I call the sacred rebirth, the stage where the ego learns to relinquish its throne, yielding to the self, the true and invisible center of the whole spiritual life. This rebirth is not a single event, but a process. In the unconscious, it often appears in dreams with images of death and resurrection, an old house collapsing to make room for a new structure, a child born in desolation, a sacred animal emerging from ashes. All symbolize the gradual death of the old ego, making way for a new order, vaster and more mysterious. People often experience this as a root-level dissolution. What once made up personal identity and pride now carries no weight. But in that loss, there emerges a deep sense of another life being born. On the inner level, this is the moment man begins to realize he is no longer the absolute controller. The ego is no longer the center of the universe, but only an instrument through which a greater principle expresses itself. I once described the self as an archetype of order, a mysterious nucleus around which both unconscious and conscious revolve. When man devotes himself to the self, he accepts to let his life run according to that deeper order, instead of yielding only to the fleeting calculations of the ego. This is a difficult renunciation, for it demands that we release our need for control and the prideful desire to be everything. Oh, rebirth also means beginning to see the world with new eyes. Sorrows once burying us now appear as material for growth. Failures are no longer mere wounds. But, leçons a serenity gradually forms. We see we need not compete to prove worth, for existence itself is already a part of the larger order of the universe. This is liberation, not by fleeing life, but by embracing life with all it brings, even its dark sides, with a wiser attitude. But even this rebirth is not the conclusion. It opens the door to another stage, communion with the eternal, where the individual not only becomes a unified whole within, but also finds harmony with the cosmos and humanity there. The personal process merges into a sacred order, like a drop of water finally dissolving into the ocean. Yet, still retaining its uniqueness, after experiencing rebirth in the self, a new door opens, harmony with the eternal, with an order beyond the boundaries of self. Here, the process is no longer just inner unity, but connection with the universe, with humanity, with the entire flow of life. In this state, one realizes that one's existence is not confined within the borders of a small ego, but is part of a vast invisible network. Every act, every thought, every feeling sends ripples outward, touching other waves, forming a shared music. People often describe this as a communion experience, the feeling of being both a separate being and simultaneously dissolving into the whole. I once wrote that in the deepest layer of the unconscious, the individual touches what I call the collective unconscious, the realm containing symbols, myths, and eternal experiences of all humanity. When we truly live in communion, we are no longer bound by personal desires or conflicts. Instead, we feel the power of humanity as a whole flowing in our veins. This is not self-dissolution in the sense of losing uniqueness, but an expansion of the ego so that it becomes part of the whole without disappearing. At this stage, people often experience a profound stillness, an ability to see life from a vantage point beyond time. We see that personal tragedies, historical upheavals, even death, are only chapters in a greater play, a play in which we are both actors and audience. Fear gradually disappears, replaced by acceptance and deeper love for life, for everything. Even loss becomes necessary for the eternal music of the cosmos. Yet the journey still does not close. For after this communion, another stage awaits, the stage of creativity and offering. Once united with the eternal, man returns to the ordinary world, carrying within the light he has found, to create, to give, to enrich the common life of humanity. And here, the circle of the personal process gradually becomes whole. After passing through communion with the eternal, man does not stop in inner stillness, but gradually returns to the flow of daily life. But this is no longer a return into unconsciousness or obscurity as at the beginning. This time, we return with new light, new power, and new responsibility to turn inner enlightenment into creative action and offering to life. At this stage, man no longer seeks meaning only for himself, for meaning has become something lived and breathed in every moment. Instead, the greatest question is, what will I do with the light I have found? And the answer comes through creativity. Creativity here is not limited to art or knowledge, but is present in every daily act. How we listen to another, how we heal a wound, how we start a work, or how we sow a seed of hope into the world. Jung once emphasized that true maturity of the soul lies not only in uniting the self, but also in serving the whole. When the individual has connected with the collective unconscious, they become a channel, an instrument through which the energy of the whole is expressed in their unique form. Therefore, each person at this stage becomes a musician, playing the music of their life while also harmonizing with the symphony of the universe. The special thing about this stage is its endlessness. Creativity and offering are not a task with an ending, but an unceasing flow. Each day of life is an opportunity to give, to bring forth the new, to plant seeds for future generations. Here, one lives in the joy of knowing oneself to be only a short passage in a great poem. But that very passage helps complete the entire work. And then, in that journey, another stage opens, the stage of spiritual legacy, where one begins not only to create for the present, but also to leave behind marks beyond time, so that when the finite body no longer exists, the light still continues to radiate. When man has lived in creativity and offering, a new awareness arises. Everything we do today does not serve only the present moment, but also leaves marks for tomorrow. For generations we will never meet. This is the stage of spiritual legacy where every action, every thought, every seed we sow in the world becomes part of the unending flow, transcending the limits of self and time. Here, meaning no longer resides in who am I or why do I live, but expands into the question, what of me will remain when I am gone? And the answer lies not in material accumulation or fame, but in the invisible resonances we gave to life, an unexpected kindness, an opening thought, an inspiration for others to continue their journey. Jung once said that man does not live only for himself, but also as a link in the evolution of collective consciousness. Spiritual legacy is the extension of that process, where each individual, by facing their shadow, by reconciling with the collective unconscious, has left behind a less thorny path for those who come after. At this stage, we are no longer obsessed with being remembered, for we understand that all remembrance is fragile. Instead, we find peace in sowing without needing to witness the harvest. Like a farmer planting seeds in the earth, knowing the crops belong to the next generation, we become sowers of invisible seeds. Faith, courage, creativity, and the capacity to heal. And then the journey opens yet another stage, the stage of dissolution into the eternal, where man no longer perceives boundaries between me and the world, between the sower and the reaper. This is the point where legacy is no longer mine, but simply part of the endless stream of life, like a drop of water dissolving into the ocean, not to vanish, but to become everything